Okay, everyone. Thank you very, very much for joining. Welcome to our Friday session, Friday with Metseng. Today, you're joining me, Andrew Donaldson. We're having some challenges getting it live onto Facebook, but not to worry. It is being recorded, so we will share as we go. There's no need for video either. You're welcome to keep your video on if you want. But we are going to mainly be focusing on the presentation and going through. And today we're talking about something that is very interesting, and particularly where we find ourselves at the moment, not just in terms of lockdown, but I think a little bit more globally as well, and looking at sort of where as a not just as a nation, but as a people, we're going and who we can trust and who we can't trust. Now, we're basing a lot of this presentation on The Speed of Trust, which is a book written by Stephen MR Covey. If you know The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, that's written by I think it's Stephen M. Covey, and this is Stephen Covey's son, who's written the Speed of Trust. And he writes that trust in itself is something that changes everything, as he says on his book there, because it literally is. If you look at the image in front of you, and it's just a very simple, well, I say simple, it's a beautiful bar of gold actually, or four of them. Now, if we think back to trust, there was a interesting development with the gold standard. Now, the gold standard is basically a standard that was used for currency across the world, and it was to say that if we link all the different currencies to a single standard, i.e. the gold standard, then we have faith across the different currencies, or we have trust in the various currencies when we look at their values. But the US, in particular, the US started stockpiling silver for some reason, and they decided to come off the gold currency or the gold standard and move across to the silver standard at some stage. And as a result of that, their whole sort of dollar economy crashed because the value of silver could not equate to the value of gold. And for some reason, they hadn't realized that. But that it's sort of looking at trust and saying that there's a lot of factors that underlie trust as such. So let's have a quick look at what those are. So there's a little sort of long piece here, but I'm going to read it because I think it ultimately brings together what it is that we're doing here. Is there's one thing that is common to every individual, relationship, team, family, organization, nation, economy, and civilization throughout the world. One thing which, if removed, will destroy the most powerful government, the most successful business, the most thriving economy, the most influential leadership, the greatest friendship, the strongest character, and the deepest love. On the other hand, if developed and leveraged, that one thing has a potential to create unparalleled success and prosperity in every dimension of life. And that one thing is known as trust. And here, Stephen MR Covey says, nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. And the examples here, if we look at this, if we look at trust and we think of where we are at the moment, you think of your relationships, you think of your family, you think of the organization that you're either building or that you're working for. Think about how trust develops. If you're able to deliver on what you say you're going to deliver, then you build trust. But trust is a multifaceted concept, and we will look at that, and we'll also look at how it goes into these different relationships, because remember, you have starting with yourself, you've got trust in yourself and your own ability to do something. But then as you move out into the world and you interact with communities, with other people, you build relationships, you need to consider where the trust is. And from two aspects, you're thinking about where is the trust that you have, that you're placing in someone else, but then also think about your own ability to generate trust, to have others trust you, to have others trust your brand, to trust your business, to trust your organization. And if we look at it even further beyond that, it's looking at how does the market relate? How do governments, political institutions, how do they build and as well as destroy trust. So let's work through that and see where we get to, and see if trust itself is something that can actually speed up. Now, I brought this in quite early. And if you do look at the book, and I would recommend, certainly if you're not interested in reading a book, if you don't like sort of self-development books, then I'd say go have a look on YouTube. Go and have a look on even Google Images. You find some fantastic stuff around the speed of trust that's been developed. Mine is quite a short piece. Yeah, we don't have a lot of time to go into all the details, but I think it's key to look at trust from a from the components that makes it. So on the left hand side here, we've got a beautiful picture of the tree, and we've got on the left hand side, sorry, the right hand side of your screen, you've got results, competence, capability. Results and capability factor into competence. So we're looking at two things here. We're looking at competence at the top, and at the bottom you can see character. So for competence, we're saying the results that are generated and the capability is an important factor of trust. And at the bottom, we're saying from a character point of view, integrity and intention. So let's unpack all of that. Now, the intention here is not to look at this in isolation. We're trying to think about this as the components with which we are able to build trust, but or I've put growing trust because of the tree, but essentially we're trying to build trust, and on the other hand, we're trying to measure trust. We're trying to find a really useful way in which we can measure whether our suppliers, or whether the relationships that we're in, or society, institutions, etc., how are we able to measure whether or not they are worthy of our trust? And this helps us to do that. So if we start with character, I think character is fundamental. It is, as you can see here, it's the very root. It goes into the very root of who you are as an individual, and it does the same with an organization. It goes all the way through, and we'll unpack each of these as we work through so the next 30 or 40 minutes. But when we start with character, we've broken that up into integrity and intention. Now, integrity is very much the a core character that runs through who you are. You can amend your integrity. You can obviously, and we'll see about building trust as we go, but ultimately it's integral to your being. It is about who you are. And so if we're looking to trust someone, you really want to get down to the integrity. Are they really what they say they are? And when I say are they really what they say they are, the what is basically it's the result. Are we seeing what they say they are? Do their behaviors demonstrate their values, or demonstrate what they say their values are, if that makes sense? So we start with integrity, because that really is the core of any relationship, is understanding the integrity that someone works with. Then we work through to intention. Now, intention is as important, I guess, as integrity, because if you're looking for someone to work with you, is their intention aligned to your own? Because if it's not, then you can't trust them to do the piece of work. And remember, we're looking at this as trust. It's not an overall yes, I trust them, or no, I don't. It's trusting in a situation. So if we look at a doctor, if you go to a general practitioner or a GP, and you've got a cough or a cold, that's fantastic. You go into the GP, you trust that their 7 years of doctor school has equipped them to be a medical professional. But if their intention is not right, and they don't actually want to do that, then you've got a little bit of an issue. But ultimately, if you trust them to be your GP when you have a flu, that doesn't mean that you're going to trust them when you need to have surgery on your arm or your leg, etc., because they do not have the competence or the capability and results. So we're looking at trust here as very much a transaction. And in that transaction, do you have the people, or does the person have the integrity, the intention to do a good job? And then the competence. And competence, you can again look at measuring it from two points of view. Capability, you can look at, like the example, yeah, the doctor. Does the doctor have the capability? Yes, they have. They've got a great degree in medicine. They've been practicing for a number of years. And so, to all extent and purposes, they have the capability to do the job that you require. Now, you can look at the results as a final measure and you can say, right, they've demonstrated that they've got integrity. Their intention is good. They love working with people. They want to see healthy people. They have the capability to do that. But ultimately, do they deliver the results? And this is usually where, if you look at ratings, whether it's on Takealot or it's on Fiverr or whether it's on Amazon, etc., you can see whether or not the results demonstrate um, what they say they're going to be able to deliver. And results, in my experience, comes down a lot to how the organization, particularly with organizational trust, how the organization is able to execute. So having the capabilities is one thing, but being able to execute that in line with what you want to do and what you're promising to deliver is a completely different thing. And the only way to really see whether those capabilities, intention, and integrity are being aligned in a way that will deliver is by measuring the results. Right. So that's really what you want to look at when we're looking at trust. Now, I'm going to have a quick look. I think if I jump forward one, you can see here that trust has been simplified for this reason and through the book into 5 different components. And I'm going to jump back into what I've just gone through now in a second. But I just want to come here and say we're going to look at trust from a position of self. So how do you build trust in yourself? How do you build relationship trust, organizational trust, market trust, and societal trust? And I'm going to flip those around. I'm going to start with the self, but then I'm going to start with societal trust, work down through market, organization, relationship. Because I think from your own sort of personal point of view, if we look at this from a trust yourself point of view, you really need to start with yourself. If you fail to trust yourself, then others are not going to be able to trust you as well. And so, if you use this measure that we've just gone through, look at your own circumstances, look at the people that you deal with, and think about what they trust you to do. What is it that they're actually happy to ask you to do on their behalf or pay you to do? Because that's where they trust you. And that, if you go back through, you'll see that's because you've delivered the results, you have the capability, you have the intention and the integrity. Then go and have a look at some of the other relationships that you may be failing at, and look at other areas where you'd like to be trusted, but where people are not, or organizations or relationships are not at a sort of high trust level. Because that will probably, if you go through this and say, what are the results that were expected? A great example here is going to the bank. If you pop into the bank looks at particularly your competence. It looks at the results. Are you generating an income? Do you have the capability to pay back a loan if you're applying for a loan, right? And that's the only measures really that they are in. They're not as concerned with your intention or your integrity. Obviously, they will do the KYC, your client checks. They will do the FICA checks, etc. That, as far as they're concerned, that is your character. That's your integrity. They're comfortable you are who you say you are, and you have the intention to repay the loan. But they're much more concerned, and the place that usually trips people up is the results and the capabilities. So think about that just as we go through, and think about these as well at different levels as we talk about societal trust, we talk about relationship trust, etc. So here's a nice one, just back to the services. We judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their behaviors. Now, the reason I brought this in is because we are living in a really interesting time, in a really interesting sort of society. So, globally we've got COVID-19. It's there. You can't deny it. We sort of look at ourselves in South Africa and we think, wow, we've got it really, really tough. And yet I look at the UK, where I've got some family staying. We've got family in Europe, and we look at the differences of sort of the lockdown and how it's progressing. In the UK, there's been a huge amount of sort of lack of trust in the government. They're only just beginning to open some of the beauty salons, etc., that we've had open for some time already, yeah. But they've had over 10,000 deaths, so quite a significant number in comparison. Well, I think we're over 10,000, so I think they're a lot higher than that. They're over 50,000 to be honest. So we look at it and we're essentially judging, we're judging others by their behavior, and we're looking at them and we're saying, well, that's completely wrong. We look at ourselves and we say, what is our intention when it comes to this? And I've got the two images, yeah, that are much more pertinent in a South African context, which is the cigarettes and the alcohol, which the cigarettes obviously have been banned since March. The alcohol, we will call it a yo-yo. It sort of goes up and down as to whether it's banned or not banned. Now, personally, I'm not overly worried about either of these, other than the fact that there's livelihoods at stake for a lot of these businesses. We did a bit of a travel last week through the Western Cape, where we're based, and I can tell you it's sad. It's very, very sad to see the wine farms standing empty, or the pubs along the sides of the road, where you'd have lots of foreigners, yeah, tasting and enjoying the wine, enjoying the weather. It's up here in the West Coast, it's flower season. You're expecting to see a lot of people moving around. But the reason I put these two here is when we come to trust, and particularly this statement, you're looking at our intention. And let's say you're a smoker, and you say, generally, you're a pretty law-abiding citizen. You don't have too many issues with that. But then the government takes away your cigarettes. Now what do? Now, as a law-abiding citizen, you think, well, I've got a choice. We all have a choice. You either stop smoking, or you switch, or you don't, and you find someone who can supply it to you illegally. Now, I don't judge, and I don't say that's good or bad. The point that I'm making here is that your intentions, when you think about it, is really to alleviate the symptoms of your nicotine addiction. Or if you're drinking, don't say you're an alcoholic, but you may enjoy a tipple or two from time to time. And so our intention is pretty, we will say, innocent. I've spoken to many people, particularly around the drinking side, who say, yeah, but it's unfair of the government to ban the drinking, because I don't drink a lot and I enjoy having my drink. So it's actually really everyone else that's sort of making it a bit tougher for me, because they drink irresponsibly. And so your intentions are good. You say, well, I'm not one of the bad guys who drinks a lot, and yet your behaviors will demonstrate the sort of integrity here, because you'll either go and look for the illegal cigarettes or the illegal wines, brandy, whatever it is that you're drinking. And yet when we look to judge others, we will generally look much more at the results or at the behaviors. So we can point the finger and say, in that instance with the alcohol, you can say, yeah, but it's the guys who are maybe sitting in a shebeen who are drinking too much, and then on the way home they cause problems, trouble. They end up in hospital, which is taking hospital beds. And so really it's those guys that are in trouble. So we always portray our sort of our judgment onto others based on their behavior and not their intention. We don't think about what was their intention, but when we look at ourselves, it's much more our own intention. So it's just something to consider. And I said I'm going to start with societal trust, because I think societal trust for us in South Africa is probably at an all-time low, and it's not just here, but I think internationally we've got a huge crisis of trust in our society. Um, and the reason for it, if we look here, is the overriding principle of high societal trust is contribution. And now I'm thinking particularly, yeah, when we think of societal trust, we're thinking about societal institutions. We are thinking about political parties. And really, when we look at political parties, when we are voting political parties in, our intention, or the political parties at least stated intention, is to create value. And that is through contribution, right? And yet what we find in our society here in South Africa is that there seems to be a lot more destruction than actually building and creating value. Now, the reason for that, the state here, is the benefits are often intangible, when we talk about the contribution, but they pay dividends when you least expect it. So over the long term, societal trust will pay back a huge amount of dividends. But in the short term, it's not as evident. And when you work on a short-term mentality, as I think a lot of our political parties tend to do, because they are voted in for terms of 5 years at a time, they struggle to create the value. And so it leads to more destruction. Now, there's a great example here at the bottom. If you haven't been reading ahead and just sort of been sitting back and listening to me, you'll see that during the 1992 Los Angeles riots, which was sparked by the Rodney King trial, many neighborhoods were burnt and looted. But amazingly, all McDonald's remained untouched. And when people were asked why, they responded by saying that they would not want to harm a company that gives so much back to the community. So McDonald's received a huge trust dividend based on their contribution to society. And that's because they've got Ronald McDonald, and they do a lot. They provide a lot of jobs in communities, and they feed the community, right? They're, other than their sort of unhealthy, um, the unhealthiness, I'll call it that, they generally have a very good reputation. Now, when I relate that back to riots that we have, and protests and marches and burnings here in South Africa, we're always quite astounded at the fact that those who are protesting and looting will generally burn down government buildings. They burn down clinics, they burn down libraries, they burn down community centers. Um, and they leave everything else virtually untouched. They might burn a few cars and stuff that get in the way. But generally, when we look at that, that's telling us that there is a very low level of societal trust in our government. Because when they go and they're looting and burning, they are generally burning down government buildings. And that means that they don't have that belief that the buildings that are there are actually producing contribution to society. I mean, great example we had in the last few weeks. Well, plenty of examples of societal trust being broken when we look over the last few weeks with the COVID 19 sort of money just disappearing, and uh, tenders being awarded to family members in direct sort of contrast to what should be happening. You know, if you go look at our constitution and our parliamentary laws, all of those people who have got family who are benefiting from tenders as a result of the COVID-19 should lose their position, because that's the rule of parliament. But we don't trust that that will be enforced, because we know that the ruling party has put in place their own structures to investigate themselves for their own wrongdoing. So our trust in that is very low. And I'm not judging it. I'm just sort of using that as an example to say that that's where we are now. A another question then is, can that be restored? Now, if I look, and you know, we can talk very quickly about the ANC as an organization. And you know, if you take away maybe the last 10 years, maybe 15 years of their history, and you look at them as a liberation movement, they are probably one of the, well, they are the oldest liberation movement in Africa. And they are probably one of the most successful as well, in terms of having stayed the course, having sort of managed after such a long time to win out and get political freedom as a result. I think they've got a fantastic story to tell, but when you include the last 10 or 15 years, it actually becomes a very, very sad story for that organization. So the question there that I'd ask is, can they restore trust? And so what we've said here is it may be difficult in most cases, but it can be restored, and often even enhanced. And the path to restoration is to increase personal credibility and to behave in ways that inspire trust. Now, generally, as it said at the top there, it can be more difficult in most cases, and it's dependent on how that trust is lost. So there are differences, and we've got it laid out there. So a loss of trust created by a violation of character, so integrity of intent, is far more difficult to restore than a loss created by a violation of competence, So capabilities and results. So when we look at the example here of the ANC, and we say, well, from a societal point of view, I think there has been a significant violation of character, loss of trust in character in terms of the integrity of the leadership there, and also of the intention. I think there's been a lot of that. But I think as you move down through that organization, you'll see that there's actually also been a loss of trust created by the violation of competence, the capabilities and results. And I think in my mind, certainly, I think that's somewhere, if I was looking at that organization and other organizations as well that are involved, yeah, and think about even your business in this context. If you are in a position where you've lost trust of a key supplier or customers, etc., think about how you've lost that. If it's been an integrity issue, it's a bit more difficult for you to build that up. But if it's been a competence thing and you've lost customers, perhaps because you were unable to deliver, you didn't even know really what you were doing, and you were still figuring things out, then you can always go back and demonstrate that. And that's the path to building trust. And it takes a little bit longer. But I think that there's certainly a lot that you can do there. And back to the example, yeah, I think across the ANC, if you look perhaps at some of the more junior levels, there may still be a lot of individuals there who were not perhaps competent. They didn't have the capabilities to deliver what they needed to, and so the results, they were flawed. But that's something that can be rectified. The character, the integrity, is a little bit more difficult to rectify, and so that's where that will take a far bigger piece of the sort of challenge to build trust if it's been a character trust that's been broken. But as I say, the ANC is just a great example because we're looking at societal trust. But I think a lot of the political parties are in the same position and can do more. And we go beyond that. There's other sort of large societal institutions that need some work. Okay, so let's leave societal trust for a moment and move on to market trust. Now, this is related. This is really looking at your brand in the market, in the sort of larger. Now, what I've done here, you can see we've got 4 diagrams, and each one of those is a South African rand versus a different currency. So I've used the euro, US dollar, Indian rupee, and the pound. And what this is really, it's a demonstration over 10 years of how the world, and I've used sort of 4 currencies from different areas, so we can see how the world has viewed South Africa and South African rand in terms of our brand, our reputation, and believing in our capability and experience and results. And I think you can see quite clearly, since 2011, it has been on a downward trend. So our sort of brand, South Africa, is not doing all that well. You can see also, though, coming back to the previous slide about building trust, is you can see that through that period of 10 years where we've lost trust consistently, and it is on a downward spiral rather than up, you can see periods where trust has been regained, rebuilt. And if you look particularly around 2018, this is the end of Jacob Zuma's presidency, you can see there was suddenly a sort of big jump in the trust for us as a nation, and particularly when looking at the rand. So this demonstrates also, and you can see the marked sort of drop offs in 2020 for COVID-19. You can see the lockdown sort of going, and you can see that across all 4 of these graphs. But then you can also see that that was a knee-jerk reaction, and you can see it slowly building back up again. But then you can see just towards the end, again, it's not perhaps as clearly zoomed in here, but it drops straight back down again. So our rand exchange rate, which I'm using here as a measure of our trust that the market, the global market, has placed in us, is back at the beginning of lockdown levels, which is lower than it has been for the previous 10 years. Now that's quite scary for us. But again, when we look and we say we have work to do to rebuild the trust, there's a lot that we can do and should look at doing. And that's why I wanted to start and go through societal trust, because I think when we start at societal trust, you're looking at the very big picture. we have a society. It's a very complex society, but it's also a society that is part of um, obviously the rest of the world. We don't live in isolation, and the trust that we build as a society is resonated across the world in how we are perceived and how we're able to do that. Now, when we remove the societal trust and we say, yeah, that's all fine because that's very, very high level, and it's the same as the market trust, what can we do to influence? And that's why I take it back to the self, because I think if we start at ourselves and we say, how do we build trust around us? It's the only way that if that's all that we can really influence, then we can build trust around us. And one of the big ways to do that is organizational trust. Now, organizational trust is looking at your business. So whether you're a brand new entrepreneur, or whether you're someone who works in a business, you're an employee, or you're thinking of starting a business, or you work in a small business, think about where you're going with your organization and how you build a high trust organization as opposed to a low trust organization. So the low trust organization you can see here on the left is where people manipulate or distort facts. So you can tell almost immediately if you're dealing with a low trust organization, because whether you're dealing with um, the receptionist or you're dealing with someone else, you'll hear lots of stories about what they can do, what they can't do, but it doesn't generally come through. So you can get promised a lot, and I find this a lot with organizations where the salespeople are not aligned to the process or the product creation. So salespeople will sell you almost anything, and then the product people have got to go and create, or they've got to disappoint the customer. So I think you'll get a lot of manipulation or distorted facts from salespeople um, if they're not correctly aligned to their organization. People hoard information. Um, this is really, really key. I think holding on to information is a power play. They're scared of someone else getting hold of that. What tends to happen with stuff in low trust organizations, yeah, is hoarding information and getting the credit is very important, yeah, because people are very scared of their own position. And because of that, what happens is that those individuals in that low trust organization, they almost become stagnant, or they do become stagnant because they cannot move out of that, because they hold on to that information, and so they become the person, the go-to person for that information, and then they look to move on, and they cannot, because they've hoarded all that information. There's no one there who can fit into that space and take over. So they either exit the company or they stuck where they are. And this is a big problem if you're in a small organization. Bigger organizations are a little bit better able to absorb people like that in low trust organizations, but in small organizations it's a big problem. New ideas are resisted because that means change, and if you don't trust the organization is changing for a good reason, then you will resist any change. And lots of meetings and meetings and meetings, because it's always it's a great excuse to be in meetings all the time and not actually have to deliver. And there's a low energy level in low trust organizations, whereas in high trust organizations, people feel free to be candid. They're very direct. They'll give you the information that you want. They share it quite openly and honestly. They share credit because they're part of a team. It's a team effort, a collective effort, rather than the individual. New ideas are welcome, and this is the great thing in a high trust organization, because new ideas are welcome, but people are candid and able to challenge. Those ideas can be properly investigated, they can be researched, people can have opinions, and you can decide on which direction to go in, and it can become a collective decision, as opposed to low trust organizations, which are generally run more autocratically, and it'll generally be run by an individual or a group of individuals who make all the decisions with very little consultation. Mistakes here are tolerated and encouraged as a way of learning, and I think that is important. Obviously, within boundaries and guidelines, mistakes should always be tolerated. And you can only really learn sometimes through making mistakes and going and trying something and failing, and then looking at why you failed, and then get back up and go again. So the high energy level, yeah, because you're not worried. You don't need to hide mistakes, which is fantastic. You can bring them out, you can discuss them, and also if you feel encouraged to do that early on and regularly, then mistakes don't become big issues. So if you make a mistake and you can talk about it, you feel comfortable talking about it, you don't sweep it under the carpet and wait until it becomes a much higher um, or much bigger issue. So organizational trust is important, and as a leader of an organization, um, you want to be considering how you generate organizational trust. Yeah. So ensuring that all structures and systems within the organization are in harmony with your core values and behaviors. And this is really key. I mean, I think particularly from a small organization point of view, this is something that we're working on at the moment in HBX, because we we understand that we as the founders are looking to do something quite unique. We're trying to do something really interesting. We're focusing on stuff like education. We talk about liberation, but not as a liberation movement, more of a liberation of the mind, getting people to think a little bit further than perhaps they have before, but also educating them on the opportunities available. And so, like the session that we're running right here, we want to be able to dialogue. We want to be able to come out and talk to people, and we want to share what we know. Um, and for us, in order to do that, we need to make sure that our core values are well understood, that we are in agreement as to what we want to do. Because as we take on staff, which will be early next year, as we take on new staff, we'll essentially be looking and saying, what are they able to do? How do they fit in to what we're trying to achieve? And do they work together? Because it it is about creating this culture of making and keeping commitments, and we can only do that if we know what we're actually committing to and what we're asking others to commit to. And that's why the mission and values becomes really important. We're busy working through a new training program, which we'll be launching over the next month or two, around building your strategy. And the mission and values comes into your strategy in a huge way, because if you are not strategizing about what your next year looks like, um, and you can't fit in the mission that you're on and the values in how you want to deliver that. Now, remember, I said on the time management piece, if you haven't seen that, it's available to view on our Facebook page. You can have a look at the time management there. We talked a lot about teleology, the meaning and purpose, and values really are demonstrated in how you actually to live your life. Your values are not something esoterical. It's not something that sort of exists in a bubble somewhere. Your values, or which is most important to you, is reflected in how you live day to day. And it's really simple if we look at this, and that's why it becomes important when we're talking about trust here, because your values, it all needs to be congruent, right? So when you're creating your strategy, your business strategy, and you're looking and saying, my values are to educate, then you come back and say, right, where in my strategy have I got education? Because if education is not in there, then I'm not demonstrating that's really valuable to me. And so where we're able to deliver education, we know that that's important to us, and we're actually doing it. So education doesn't become something esoterical, it becomes something that we do. Our business and the results that we have are a demonstration of the values that we've put in, and we execute in line with our strategy, and our objectives that come there. So as a leader of an organization, big or small, you need to ensure that you have all of these structures in place, that you help your employees as they come in to share vision that is driven towards results, the results which you've put in place. Because if you have all of this again aligned, then what you're communicating to your customers, what you're communicating to your suppliers, what you're able to do when you need to go talk to your bank manager, when you talk to maybe other investors, when you're in meetings, when you're talking to your employees. It's all aligned and it's going in the right direction. I'll give you a great example of this, and it's a very well-known example, but you may not have heard of it. But you certainly have heard of Mahatma Gandhi, who sort of got these sort of early days here in South Africa in the mines, um, and he stood much later on in life, after being sort of a successful, not sure if he was a politician, but certainly also a liberation fighter. But after having liberated India, or playing a part in liberating India, he was invited to do a talk or a presentation to Parliament in Britain. Now, this is essentially the enemy that he'd been fighting for many years, and they invited him as a statesman to come into Parliament and address the Parliament, and through it the British people. And he walked in and he talked for 4 hours. And after 4 hours, one of the politicians came across to him and said, obviously very inspirational, great speak, but I do need to ask you, how is it that you were able to talk for 4 hours without a single note? You didn't bring any notes with you. You stood up in front of everyone and you spoke for 4 hours. We can't do that as politicians. How did you manage to do it? And he said, because I live in congruence. My vision, my mission, my purpose, everything, my life, it all demonstrates the same thing. I'm driving towards the same thing. I don't need notes to refer back to when I'm talking about the things that are really important to me. And this is where, from a trust point of view, his life was that congruent that he didn't need to prepare himself to be trusted. And I think that says a lot when you look at politicians today, and the amount of notes and even iPads and tablets that they sit and read off as they go. So this is sort of where I'm going to end, and this is a bigger piece, just because there are 13 behaviors, and I just want to talk through them in a little bit of detail, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But this becomes really key, because when you look at it, the market trust, the societal trust, and even the organizational trust is absolutely imperative. It's very important that you have this. But most of our relationships are with ourselves and with another, and that could be one or two or three people. But essentially, when we look at the relationship trust, I think it's got the most power of any of those to be meaningful to us in what we're doing. So there are 13 behaviors, and they are divided into three different categories: communication, dependability, and reliability. And you can also then take these and divide them up into the competence and character, or both. Now, from a communication point of view, we've got four, and those are talking straight. So be honest, right? Call things what they are. And this is really key. So this is for you to think about how you build trust, right? Be honest. That's a very easy one. And I say it's an easy one. It's an easy one for you to conceptually understand, but I think it's difficult sometimes if we're not used to talking straight and we're concerned about what other people may think when we do talk straight, and confront reality, which is the second one. So talking straight and confronting reality, because if you're not confronting reality and you're not talking about the real issues in the relationship that you have, then you're going to be misunderstood on the one hand. And if it's in a business relationship and you misunderstood, a misunderstanding leads to losses on either your side or someone else's, and obviously through this a break of trust. And confront reality. If there has been a breach of trust, then bring it out, talk about it, discuss why it happened, so that you can put things in place to remedy it. Clarifying expectations, that is probably one of the really key things. Yeah, clarify expectations. In most cases, the businesses or suppliers that you're dealing with should have an SLA or service level agreement. Ask for a service level agreement, have a contract of work, so that you're really clear as to what you're going to have and what you're going to pay. I've got an example at the moment where I'm looking for a gardening service, and the guys that I've spoke to leaves me a voice note to say, oh, he's going to charge me 300 rand, and that's fine. And I stop and I think to myself, the guy hasn't told me what he's going to be doing for that money. He hasn't told me how often he's going to come. He hasn't asked me, in fact, to answer any of those questions. He's literally come back to me with a price without actually asking. Now, you know, do I trust that he's going to do what I expect him to do? Of course I don't, because I haven't actually clearly articulated to him what I want done. So there's a problem. And so for me, yeah, what I need to do is confront reality. I need to get him out and I need to speak to him, right? So we can build that relationship. I'm not saying that I can't trust him. I'm saying that I haven't got the level of certainty that he's going to do what I require. And then create transparency. So being open and authentic, and make sure that what you see is what you get, because this is where we're looking at other people and we're asking ourselves, what can we do that's going to make a difference, right? Then some standard things, right? And I'm not going to preach on it first, but demonstrating respect. I think having respect for someone is really key. And I think the society in which we find ourselves here in South Africa, I tend to see certain in what I hear and the forums that I follow on Facebook and so forth, is a very clear lack of respect for each other, in our society, and that saddens me. But it also, because there isn't trust. We don't have enough trust, I think, in what we're doing. um, Listen first is very key as well. Listening first, and obviously there's two people, right? It's difficult who gets to listen first. But this comes back to the 7 habits of highly effective people, which says seek first to understand and then to be understood. So make sure that communication, the dialogue is two ways. um, Practical accountability: hold yourself accountable and hold others accountable. If you're not holding them accountable and you are not holding them to the high standard that they've said that they would, then you need to take part of the blame. If they're unable to, through competency and capability or results, to meet those standards that they've agreed to, then obviously you end the relationship, or you find ways of correcting that. So get them to assist with helping to do that. Then building your dependability. So keep commitments to yourself and to others. That's really important. Keep your commitments to yourself and to others. Show loyalty. If you have your customer base, obviously they become your priority. If you've got customers who've been with you for a long time, if you've got people who are working with you, and have shown commitment, if they're employed or not, or they're suppliers, and they have shown that they are willing to work and do a lot, then they should be first on the sort of receiving side when things start to go well. Deliver results. This is key. We've seen it right at the beginning there, how important results are to actually get things going. So I'm not going to go on that. The only thing I'll say with that is, do not overpromise. Be very careful here, because if you overpromise, the likelihood is that you underdeliver. If you underdeliver, that's your results that have not materialized, and so there's a trust subtraction there. And then improve. Continuous improvement is essential here as well, because you need to demonstrate that you're constantly developing your own capabilities to do that. And then look at extending trust. Extending trust, and I'm not saying extending credit, it's not the same thing. Extending trust here is looking and saying, give someone the opportunity to demonstrate, and again, go through all of this, be clear as to what you want. So like I say, with the gardening service, I will extend trust to a degree, and I will allow them to come in, allow them to start working, so that I can see whether they worthy of the trust or not. But be careful when you do this. There's two things here that we want to be careful of. One is false trust, and that is giving people responsibility, but not the authority or the resource to get the job done. So we think about organizational trust there again. But if you have a one-on-one relationship with someone that you're working with or working for, and you give them responsibility, but you do not give them the authority or the resources to do that, they're ultimately going to fail. And so the trust you've placed on them is false trust, because there isn't a way that they can deliver. And then fake trust is acting as if we trust someone when actually we really don't. And this is something that is quite ugly, because obviously people are looking to you and they're thinking, well, where does that come in? Um, and well, if you think if you act like you trust them, but again you don't give them what they need, then it's going to cause problems. So I'm going to stop there. I mean, that was a little bit of a whistle stop tour on trust. As I said, the book, The Speed of Trust, it's available in all good bookstores. I'm not working on commission. I've used it quite a lot, and I've used the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People as well. I think they are probably two of the most important books that anyone can pick up if you enjoy self development, and work through and put in place to build trust, both in yourself. I think the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is probably one of the best for building trust in yourself. And the Speed of Trust just helps you to understand